Tell me, what are your reflections on the drone attacks that we've seen on Moscow? They were limited, they were scattered, they were loosely targeted, and Ukraine is not taking responsibility openly. But what about the significance of this in your view, Sean?
I think it is pretty significant. I mean, as you alluded to, the truth is quite difficult to get hold of. There's been various reports of two drones, all the way up to 35 drones. I've seen a couple of video clips released online, and frankly, as a chap who's flown most of his life, they actually look as if they're flying backwards, these things. There's a who knows what the truth is. I think from a Ukraine perspective, this has very limited military effect, but undoubtedly has had a very symbolic effect. If it was Putin, he's already been expressing his anger and saying that that will escalate the war. But I think what's most telling is that there's been interviews with Russians from Moscow who've just been scared. They've been insulated from the war. They've been fed a load of lies by the Putin regime. But all of a sudden now, this war is feeling a bit closer. Yes, it may have been nothing more than a couple of minor bangs, but that has clearly upset Muscovites, and it's
Yes.
just another little crack in the dam.
It will certainly unsettle the population in Moscow, won't it? And embarrass the Kremlin because they hate any kind of evidence of a military failing. And letting these drones hit their targets deep inside their country at the prize target, the most prized target of all, that is an embarrassment for the military too.
It is, if indeed is Ukraine's launch it. I mean, there are all sorts of examples of history where Russia has been very happy to kill its own people under false flag operations when it wants to escalate. And let's be clear that the war in Ukraine is not going according to plan. We're into the second year at the moment. Russia's ground out a victory in Bakhmut, but frankly, it's waiting for the starting pistol to fire for Ukraine's spring offensive, and it doesn't seem to have many ideas left at the moment in there. So what Russia desperately needs is more people, needs to get its industry onto a war footing. And there's all sorts of rumors about Putin trying to get people to work 6-day weeks for no extra money,
Mm.
trying to get more people in the military. And actually, therefore, things like this strike in Moscow, if that starts to make Muscovites and Russians more widely feel that they are in a war of national survival, then all of a sudden they might be prepared to hunker down more and support Putin even more. So there
Yeah.
are benefits for Putin in doing a sort of mini false flag
Yeah,
operation.
that is an interesting alternative view, and I guess the Kremlin would wish to see more solidarity on the part of the Russian people, as and when the counteroffensive and the new offensive really kicks in, because then you're going to see more Russians being carried home in body bags, and it's going to test the resolve of Russians.
It is. I think one of the things that's has been fascinating about the news today, particularly around Putin's reaction to these drone strikes, is almost incredulity. And you sort of think we've just seen the 17th day of drone strikes and missile strikes on the capital of Ukraine in Kiev, and yet Russia is rather surprised that Ukraine should fight back. And actually, even if there wasn't particularly effective strikes. But I think what's fascinating about all of this is that as a military guy, why are the Russians pounding away at Kyiv using drones and missiles, which largely aren't getting through? So they're a bit like wasps in the summer. They're irritating. If they sting you, it's a bit nasty, but it's not going to change the course of the war. What seems most likely, because Putin should be targeting Ukraine's military buildup for this spring offensive, but to
Mm.
do that, you need to have satellite technology linked to headquarters, linked to forward units, can then accurately target. And what's evident from the Russian military so far is they don't do teamwork, they don't do professionalism, they don't do that sort of operation. So almost in a matter of what can we do, they're just throwing missiles. And the other factor, of course, is Putin is not a military guy, but because he runs an autocracy, he is telling the military out of anger to attack Kyiv, whereas
Yes.
actually what they should be doing is using their limited military resources to focus on military priorities.
Yeah, I've heard it suggested that there may be some worries among Ukraine's allies to see these drones strike Moscow because it could be seen as a form of escalation. And I don't know how that even adds up, really. When you look at what Russia has thrown at Ukraine by way of armament and the atrocities they've committed across that country, the idea of Putin talking about attacks on civilians rings ridiculously hollow. What more can Russia do?
Well, I agree with you, John. I think there's been a little bit of information clarity we need here. One of which is that when the West provided longer range precision strike weapons, they were very clear to Ukraine these are not to be used in Russian soil. These are not to be used in Russian soil. That did not stop Ukraine from using its own weapons to take the fight to Russia. And therefore, whether it's cross-border incursions, we've seen Ukrainians destroy some Russian rail facilities, Russian oil facilities, all within Russian soil. That is game on. In many ways, I think, as a military guy, you shouldn't expect to see Ukraine fight with its hands tied behind its
No.
back. But it is a critical difference that the West's weapons, because of the risk of escalation, there was a pretty clear mandate given to Ukraine not to use those on Russian soil.
It is obviously a good thing that Ukraine has managed to intercept the great majority of the missiles and drones aimed at Ukrainian territory. There must be an operational concern, though, Sean, which you would know about in a way which I certainly do not, about how to counter these weapons, because you wouldn't want to use, if you're Ukraine, too many Patriot missiles. They're rare, they're valuable, they're extraordinarily expensive. You need to use those where they're most needed.
You're absolutely right, John. But the lion's share of the attacks are actually these drones, these Shahed 136 drones imported from Iran. They're only about £20,000 a time. They only fly 100 miles an hour. They're not difficult to shoot down. And actually, once you know how to target them, you don't need a Patriot missile to do that. You can lie on your back with a gun in the air and just fire at them. There are some of the intercontinental ballistic missiles which are much more effective that Russia hasn't got that many of. They are definitely the sweet spot for Patriot. And then there's a blend of other air defense systems that are available in Kyiv and around key points in Ukraine. So, but undoubtedly, as you say, if Russia can literally swamp the defenses with these missiles, it might be hoping that Ukraine will run out of defenses. I have to say, my money is on Ukraine not running out, and my money is on Russia running out.
Is it your view also, Sean, that the long-awaited big offensive is now maybe just a very few days away? I've heard that said today as well.
Well, the trouble is in the media, we tend to be looking for the start line and a big whistle, a fanfare, trumpets, and off they go across the start line. That's not generally how military operations start. Phase zero, which is the sort of precursor phase before you set across the start line, is a whole series of shaping operations where you disrupt your enemy's logistics in his rear and stuff like that. And we've seen a whole succession of attacks by the Ukrainian military on oil depots, rail, logistics, weapons hubs, and stuff like that. So it's actually entirely reasonable that the first overture, the first chapter of this spring offence, is actually underway at the moment.
Mm.
But I have no doubt at all that Ukraine will be trying to keep its powder dry. It won't want Russia to know exactly where it's going to step across the start line.
Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.